Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with contemporary global concern, and my topic for today is global challenges to democracy. So, in well-established democracies such as the US and India, there have been seen many instances of democratic backsliding. So, backsliding, as the name suggests, is the rolling back of established practices that concern democracy. So, in short, it means that democratic practices are no longer resorted to, and recently variety of democracy report, VDAM report, it has downgraded the democratic rating of both the US and India. So in the case of US, the partisan pressure on the electoral process, problem in the judicial system, a harmful immigration and asylum policy, and that too coupled with the unpredictable political style of Donald Trump government, all of them, they have contributed to the United States just barely meeting the threshold of a liberal democracy, which is a severe downgrade because the US democracy is the oldest one since 1773. And in the case of India, the same VDAM report, it has placed India as an electoral autocracy, which is again a matter of shame and again severe downgradation. And this is because of various discriminatory policies and violence against minorities, increasing harassment of journalists and NGOs. Then it has also been seen that there are many countries, many nations that have moved away from democracy rather than towards it in the last few years. And these declines are happening across very many regions, including the strategically important in large countries such as Brazil, Nigeria, Turkey, and even in the very heart of European Union by the countries Hungary and Poland. And then this backtracking, this backsliding, it is also coupled with declining international support for democracy promotion. So let's have a look at what what has caused these changes, what has caused these backsliding changes. So before proceeding on to listing the changes, the factors, let's have a look at what democracy is. So democracy by its name is a complex concept, and it is also a multi-dimensional concept, which means if you try to list the important characteristic of democracy, most of uh, most of people will talk about electoral democracy, participation, and the essential process of deliberation, fourth, equality, fifth, efficient administration, and sixth, accountability. And all of them, they may be equated with seasoning or topping of rule of law, because all of these features, they are not applicable and neither feasible without rule of law, without the applicability of rule of law. So all these dimensions, all these concepts, they when clubbed together, they make any participatory government to be a democracy. Now it has been seen that the most important elements of a democracy, such as electoral, liberal principle, majoritarian, participatory, deliberative, and egalitarian democracy, are most common conceptualization in the current literature that concern the definition of democracy. But when it comes to adjudicating the trade-offs, which means that when we have these seven important characteristics, and trade-off means to reduce the intensity of one to give way to the another. So to understand it, you can take an example of exchange program, in which if you reduce the quantity or the quality of one one attribute, then you can have bigger say on the other. And this example can be given by the government policy. So when India started uh, after independence with the 5-year planning, first of all, they needed to give equitable treatment to all the sectors that were ailing by the colonial rule. So foremost, they had two things in mind: agriculture and industry. Now there is a trade-off because India at the time was in very poor financial condition. So because of those limited resources, the policymakers at that time, they needed to find a balance or needed to find a strategy which can either provide equitable distribution of resources to both the sector, or at least the resource allocation, it can kickstart the trade-off. The trade-off means if one sector be given ample, sufficient resources, there will be a conditional development of the other sectors. But since in India's case, at the time, around 90% of population was employed in agriculture, and that situation became grievous because the excess population that was employed in agriculture, they could not find any avenue for employment or remuneration. So at the time, policymakers, they found this sliver of trade-off, that if they employ the resources in industrialization, in factories, in construction, in infrastructure, first, this element, this excess resource, these excess resources, they will absorb the extra people who are working in agriculture. So this will give ample breathing space to agriculture so that it can find um, a stable income, a stable production. And in the same way, industrialization coupled with infrastructure, this will kickstart the modernization of economy, which will further generate employment on technological ground. So this is an instance of trade-off, that you give resources, or you give your attention to one sector in place of another. And it is a risky decision because even if in your best possible way of thinking, what you are doing is you are prioritizing one sector on the expense of another. So your endeavor, your line of thinking may go wrong, and the other sector that has been left out may feel the heat, may feel the losses. So this trade-off, when it comes to the important element of democracy, this trade-off situation, or this decision adjudicating the trade-off, means a decision regarding which important element to prioritize and which to leave. This has certainly an element of dilemma, because if you prioritize any one element, like if you say electoral democracy should be prioritized, which means if you are promoting democracy, then at least election, the free and fair election should be held. And this may trade off with you may ignore other aspects such as the deliberation, that even after the election has been taken place in free and fair manner, you do not expect the deliberations to go on with their pace, which in other terms it means while trading off the democratic attributes, you have prioritized electoral democracy, election should be held, but then you do not care about deliberation. You are, you can say, knowingly ignoring other attributes. So this may happen with any other attribute. It may be that you are prioritizing deliberation, but there isn't any accountability mechanism, and you are ignoring it. You're overlooking it. Or there may be efficient administration, but equality is not there. Society is divided among many hierarchies, and for the sake of democracy, you are overlooking it. So this is kind of trade-off which is uh, explaining here that yes, there are only few tools to find which element to trade off and when which to keep. And this trade-off, it has been given face in here that in practice, policymakers and scholars, they have often privileged electoral dimension of democracy over others. So according to them, election should be held in free and fair manner as much as possible. But then other tools, other appendages of democracy, such as liberal principle, the participation, deliberation, or all the other tools, they are often overlooked. Because in the end, if we are talking about some measurable attribute, like which country is democratic and which nation, which region is likely to accept this. In other words, you are talking about the extent of democracy that has been spread all over the world. So in such a case, you want to quantify it, you want to measure it. And for that matter, you need a tool, you need a parameter by which to measure it. So policymakers have employed this trade-off. Anyway, so political elites are strategic actors that adapt to incentive and they may therefore continue hold election while systematically undermining aspects of democracy that have received less international scrutiny, such as freedom of expression, freedom of association, and protection of minorities. So the um, ramification of this trade-off are visible here that political elites, it means the policymakers, top bureaucrats, party leaders, and all such strategic actors, they know that in the quantification of democracy, people, because of their simplistic nature, they need a parameter to measure if democracy is working, if democracy is spreading its root, and for which they seek a simple solution, a simple statistic, which is available in this electoral dimension. So policymakers or even people all over the world, they look at this attribute that yes, many countries they are holding free and fair elections. That means they are democracy, and those political elites in those countries that are holding such free and fair election in only name, they try to exploit this line of thought because they know that all the world need is a parameter and all the world care about if they are holding elections. So yes, they hold election because it gives them incentive. And when this task is done, when this activity is done, their sole responsibility is over, and now they can do as they wish. So here, what incentive, what trade-off they themselves find is that they continue to hold election, but they repress, they undermine other aspects of democracy, such as they kick on the freedom of expression, they throttle freedom of expression, they gag media, they stop assemblies and association, and they try to exploit on the minority card or us versus them card. Then another complication in conceptualizing and measuring the decline of democracy is that national patterns can mask sub-national variation, especially in federalist and decentralized states such as Argentina, Brazil, India, Mexico, and United States. So another problem with such quantification, with such conceptualization and measuring decline of democracy, it is about subnational variations. And you know what a federal country is. So federal country or a federal nation is type of a power sharing mechanism in which the political power it is shared both horizontally and vertically among different levels. So as in India's case, we have horizontal distribution among three branches of government: legislature, executive, and judiciary. And the vertical distribution, it happens in the manner of level. On the apex, pan-Indian or pan-geographical entity, the union government, it works on the national subject, the union subject, then the state level, the regional variation, the second such entity, and the last, the local government. So this is how power is shared among different entities, and this makes any country federal in character. So the another problem is here that there are variations on the state and local level, and in India's case, it is visible in different formats, and this visibility is so much unpredictable and so much diverse that any foreign onlooker, any foreign observer will not find any pattern in the practice of democracy. So the examples are various state governments, such as you can take some very highly visible examples, such as the practices of West Bengal, Kerala, the Dravidian states, then the tribal state, then the practices in northeastern state. So all these appendages in north, south, and east direction, they have an element of unpredictability. So if you look at both national and regional level, or national or state level, you will find variation. At the national level, the main competition is between BJP and INC, the left versus central or right wing. Whereas at the state level, you have all shades of political spectrum. West Bengal and Kerala, they are communist. Dravidian party, they are more like ethnic. They more garner votes in names of ethnic nationalism. Whereas tribalism and northeastern state, they have another element of vote bank or regional variation by the name of tribal nationalism or tribal regionalism. So this example, it encapsulates how a quantification of decline of democracy, it is difficult without taking into account such subnational variations. Then the terminology is still somewhat in flux. Democratic backsliding, autocratization, or democratic recession seems to be the most prominent terms, but the exact meaning, and that too on ground level, it has not found any place in common parlance. It has not found any place in common dictionary. So here, the problem with such a you can say general terminology is that many people will find the interpretations varying according to their own situation. Then the current period more often takes the form of incremental decline from within rather than rapid and democratic collapse. So what we are seeing is like this is the instance of the status of democracy is that the people world over, they are walking away from democracy rather than destroying it completely. So all this suggests that reduced support for democracy by international community leads autocrat to feel increasingly unencumbered in their behavior, with many dropping the pseudo-democratic mask. So this declining support of democracy allows leaders to restrict aspects of democracy which are most crucial for its survival, such as the activities of civil society organization. So the meaning of this passage is that we have seen here that democracy is not collapsing. It is just that people are staying away from it. It also suggests that people have their own reasons, and we do not know what those reasons are. And the text also highlight that there are many subnational or federal variations. So all in all, so this support for democracy, it has reduced, if not altogether vanished. So this reduced support has made autocrats the world over to feel highly emboldened to restrict various aspects of democracy. And with this sentence of dropping the pseudo-democratic mask, it means that many research they have observed that this trading of exercise, this privileging one aspect of democracy in place of others, this trading of this has manifested in a peculiar phenomena in which the autocrats world over, what they do, they put on a pseudo-democratic mask. So this pseudo-democratic mask means that all those autocrats, they try to win the support of the international community by holding election. But then after holding election, they try to restrict the the essential aspects of democracy by one practice or another. So this thing has been going on before the democracy started backsliding. Before many many prominent leaders of the world, they try to stay low in their approach to restrict democracy. But since they have found that if the international community itself is not supporting democracy, then it's time that they should drop their pseudo-democratic mask. And this behavior, it emboldens them. Then, next paragraph, some scholars also highlight democracy's resilience. So, democracy is stagnating rather than declining in areas such as Africa and Latin America, whereas others acknowledge that democracy's advance has somewhat slowed following the third wave of democratic integration. So, the next paragraph, do international dimension matter for backsliding? So, the international democracy promotion, in particular election monitoring, can deter electoral fraud and thus benefit democratization. Democratization means the practice of adopting democratic attributes, democratic features, or to getting closer in the folds of democracy. So earlier it used to happen that the support of international community was essential because this community, even if by trading off it was monitoring only one aspect of democracy, but still there was some upper hand, some observation, some regulation that deterred electoral fraud, and this exercise thus benefited democratization. But in many major democracies, such as the rising polarization in the United States or backsliding within the European Union, they have undermined their pro-democracy advocacy. So declining support for democracy promotion has opened space for political elites to repress citizens more openly, especially around elections. So the meaning of this passage is that uh, the Western civilization, especially the US and many prominent European countries, they have been harbinger or close monitor of democracy. And it was because of their own practice at home, their own domestic democratic practices that have put a check on democratic backsliding elsewhere in the world. And they have also been the ardent supporter of democracy, and they did try to support democracy on in various countries, such as the Barack Obama government. It tried to integrate the elements of democracy in Afghanistan. And in the same way, the Bush government, it also tried to walk the same democratic lines when it invaded Iraq. So all in all, so the earlier wave, this first and second wave of democratization, it rests on the shoulders of these giants, especially the US, EU, and India as well, because India is again, a largest democracy. But when the supporters themselves, when the observers and monitor themselves, if they start stepping away from democracy for whatever reason, then it gives space to and it gives leeway and open power to political elites of all other semi-democratic countries or autocracies or dictatorship to waive such relaxations. It emboldens such non-democratic political elites to repress their citizens. Then the factors of such backslide, the increase in polarization and misinformation as global drivers of autocratization, they stand as the two prominent factors that are helping in democratic backsliding, or in other words, the process of autocratization. So the rise of social media, which is controlled by international community and international technology companies, so they have disproportionately benefit outsiders and extremist candidates. So the rise of social media again is a factor to be taken into account. The first reason for which is that the servers of or the you can say high offices of such social media are based in foreign countries, and this gives such outsiders and extremist candidates to fuel all kinds of radical and polar ideas. In other words, let's take example of Facebook, Instagram, uh, X, it was earlier Twitter, and search engine Google. So most of the social media is controlled by these four giants. Now, there have been many instances that the US government, the European Union, and many European countries, they have tried to rein in such social media giants so that they make changes in their algorithms and fall in line. So this line, this sentence essentially captures what needs to be done. So in case of all these social media giants, many democratic government, they want them to install such filters so that misinformation and radical ideas, extremist ideas, such non-persona and polarizing idea should be filtered out. But these giants, they are not working on it. Even after they have been even after they have been penalized for the behavior, yet it is the extremism, it is the misinformation, it is the rampant disregards of political rights of people that gives the algorithm the much needed waiver, the much needed money, the much needed profits, for which they are not falling in line. Then anti-pluralist party in several countries, they use social media to spread information about opponents and outgroups, subsequently increasing polarization. So anti-pluralist means the democracy, it is centered on pluralism. Pluralism means diversity, that in any country, all shades of diversity, they should be taken into account, they should be needed to, and their grievances be addressed. But those political party that are anti-pluralism, which means they are talking about their own community, their own regions, or their own people. So those anti-pluralist parties, they spread misinformation against the people they do not like, such against such outgroups. So in case of India, Hindu versus Muslim, or especially the immigrants from Bangladesh. In case of US, the outgroups are the Mexicans, the Africans, the people who have come from different countries, mostly the immigrants. So these outgroups, for whatever reasons, they needed to be weeded out as these anti-pluralist parties they believe, and to walk on what they propose and to walk on what they profess, they spread such misinformation. And this misinformation, coupled with the social media algorithms, this led to increasing polarizations between different strands of community. So this polarization is also visible in many democratic countries in terms of the intellectual versus conservatives, or the religious ardents versus liberals, between the hypocrites versus liberals. So such polarizations is happening all over the world, and it is especially visible in long established democracies. Then this democratic backsliding, it privileges domestic factors such as leadership, political culture, political coalitions, institutions, and socio-economic conditions. So the meaning of this passage is, it is the political leaders, the political elites that are going to benefit from democratic backsliding. Because if democracy is not there, if democracy is not in practice, then they will not see any question for rights. They will not see any, they do not need to care about individual rights. They do not need to care about equality. They can enjoy their hierarchy. They can employ the technical manpower, the administrative machinery to repress, to persecute people. They can weed out their political opponents. They can spread misinformation. So the most, the group that is going to benefit most from this democratic backsliding, it is the elite. And let's have a look at the consequences of democracy's decline. So what are the consequences of this current way of democratic backsliding? So the benefits of democracy are economic development, education, security, conflict, health, public goods provisions. So global and such sustained shift towards authoritarianism will likely negatively affect all these outcomes. And it has been seen that big and powerful countries such as United States, they are becoming less democratic, has important system level consequences, including emboldening autocrats and diffusing non-democratic values and ideas across the world. So the consequences are two. The first one is that democracy, it has many benefits in terms of economic development, which is equitable. If all reasons, if all shades, if all diversity are taken into account, then all such economic, geographical, and you can say different strands of different level of society, they will be given equitable or at least reasonable resources. But if democracy is not there, then one group, one majoritarianism is going to benefit from this development. And then when it comes to education, most democracy, they work ardently on many social sector initiatives, many social sector indicators such as education, health, public good provisions, welfare policies. So if democracy is not there, such allocations to these social media, social indicators, they will not be given equal thought. They will not be taken into account, or they may altogether be ignored. Then the security and conflict dimension in democracy, in a democracy and in an autocracy, they are different. You can take example of North Korea. So North Korea is not a democracy. So what happens there? You are not likely to hear about what goes inside North Korea, except the the weapons it tests. Other than that, you're not likely to hear anything about North Korea. And you can also take example of many war economies. So here in case of Russia, it has clearly encroached upon the land of a democratic country. In that case, the security and conflict dimension, it can take any form, and the dimension of unpredictability comes in the factor, because non-democratic countries, they behave in many way, multiple way, but most of their behavior, they are violent. They do not care about rights of other people. They do not care about liberal principle. They do not care about internationalism and rule of law. All they care about is their own benefit. So the security and conflict, it may take another turn. So this is the first negative consequence of democracy's decline. And then the second consequence is that when well-established democracies and powerful countries such as US, when they become less democratic, then it leads to level consequences. So those system level consequences, they manifest. First, they autocrats, emboldens those who do not like democracy. Such political elites, they they take power in their hand. They try to dismantle all aspects of democracy and try to concentrate power in their hand. So this emboldening, along with the repressive politics they engage into, because when well-established democracies are not practicing, are not holding threads of democracy, then those who had by now, who had till now were putting on a pseudo-democratic mask. First, they throw it away, and then they try everything in their might to diffuse non-democratic values. And these non-democratic values, they get diffused not only in their own country but in other countries as well. So you can see examples of Iran, Israel, Turkey, Poland, Hungary. So there are many examples. You can take example of Venezuela. So these are the countries that have benefited most from such democratic backsliding or such reduction in international support for democracy. Then one important and serious trend coinciding with the current decline of democracy is increase in various forms of political violence. This has been played out in Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but there is also an overall increase in the international conflict, which has been seen first in Sudan, culminating in a civil war, then the Nagorno conflict, then Israel versus Palestine, and then Hamas and Hezbollah against Israel. And same issue, it has been going in other countries, but most of it has got its form in terms of civil conflicts. And these civil conflicts, they have been on a rise after 2011. So such civil conflict, especially it is regarding either a minority community or immigrants, and there is no dearth of examples of how such anti-immigration policy or how such anti-minority rhetorics, a form of civil conflict, are happening across the world. Even in our country, such systemic violence, it is happening. So this incidence of intra-systemic violence in democracy, that is violence by actors who compete within the democratic system but use force to further the electoral prospect. So we have been seeing such intra-systemic violence in the democratic countries increasing on a rampant scale. So you can take example of India, where the attack of BJP against Muslim, and the same way in the US and Europe as well, they have been attack on immigrants, on minorities, on political opponents such as liberals, against journalists, against who profess such left-wing communist ideologies, and such instances have been increasing. So when a violent mob stormed the US Capitol to overturn the 2020 election results, few people need to be convinced that the risk of political violence is serious and it is increasing. Then let's summarize the contribution. So the data from VDEM, Variety of Democracy, they describe the scope and severity of third wave of autocratization, which has affected all regions of the world in the last 10 years. The main drivers are polarization and misinformation. Then there are detrimental consequences of reduced support for democracy. So this reduced support, it has manifested in this way that while no country has stopped holding election, autocrats the world over, they have found a new leeway, a free hand to repress opponents and minorities more overtly. Then this decline of democracy, it has also affected citizen-led pro-democracy movement, and it talks about a violent future, especially in large multi-ethnic countries in which one dominant party, one dominant ethnic group may try to suppress all the numerical minorities in that particular country. Then, an increase in democracy after the end of Cold War was a result of regimes artificially propped up by international community in so-called post-conflict states. And these regimes, they failed because of international community's emphasis on election and a disregard for structural issues critical for driving democracy. The meaning of this passage is that it has been found that the democratic practices, the establishment of democracy, it increased after Cold War because after 1991, when the heightened tension between the US and the USSR waned up, in that case, many countries, especially from Central Asia, the Balkan state, all of them they are freed up, and such freeing it led many Western democracy to establish their own versions of democracy in those newly independent states. But those regimes they failed because even if the Western democracy they propped up, they installed their own version of democracy in those countries, they fail to take into account various structural issues that are necessary to establish a democracy. Then, the next paragraph. The rise of polarization and misinformation are just two examples of challenges. Similarly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the expansion of Chinese global influence illustrate how powerful autocratic states feel emboldened in challenging the post-Cold War liberal international order. So these two examples are given here. The first, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then Chinese global influence. And this Chinese vision of expansionism, which has been seen first in the Belt and Road Initiative, then the political skirmishes, the border issue that went on for and still going on between India and China. So these two instances, that too, the another instance of the violence that happening between Israel and Palestine, or the free hand that is given to Hezbollah, and the proxy war that Iran fights with Israel. So all these examples they show that such autocrats they feel more powerful than before, and the reason of it can be traced back to the declining support of democracy. Then the democracy in a global decline. So the latest democracy report from the VDAM Institute, it paints a grim picture. So in the last decade, the levels of democracy have declined to 1989 level for the average global citizen. In in the last 10 years, the entire expansion of political rights and freedoms since 1990 has been wiped out. The Cold War optimism about expansion and deepening of democracy is turned out to be rather premature. The meaning of this These are the statistical data that in the last 10 years there have been rise in autocratization. So rise in autocratization automatically means decline in democratization. And the statistics they speaks otherwise, that there is increase in number of close autocracies from low of 20 in 2012 to 30 in 2021. So close autocracies means they no longer interact with the world in political, economic, and social level. So the number of such autocracies they have increased. They were 12 in 2012, but they have increased to 30. So almost double increase. Then equally worrying is the electoral autocracies of place in 60 countries in the world today. So this is another worrying dimension. Electoral autocracies mean that those those countries that have put on a mask of pseudo democratic value and they hold elections, free and fair elections. They try to hold one or another kind of election just for the sake of holding it. But ultimately, they do not employ any democratic ideal or any democratic characteristic. And such autocracies are have increased up to 60 countries. Then adjusted for population size, 70% of global population lives in 90 electoral or close autocracies. So 70% of people of the world either they are living in one or another form of autocracies. So this is a varying picture, and you can say such a statistic it can be used to paint the actual picture of if democracy is prospering or backsliding. Then let's have a look at how autocratization unfolds. So democracy broke down in almost 80% of all instances since 1900 when autocratization started in a democracy. So this is another one statistic. Put simply, it means if any country it moves towards autocratization, then democracy will fail in that country. Similarly, of the 10 countries with the largest movement towards autocracy in the last 10 years, all were initially liberal or electoral democracies. This is another statistic which say the the present uh, largest autocracies, the present autocracy, they were initially liberal or electoral democracies. So such backslide from electoral democracy to autocracy, it is worrying. Now we are looking at some more statistics. More than 20% of countries in the European Union are they moving towards autocracy. So European Union, which is a hub of democracy, if 20% of countries are moving towards autocracy, it's like finding a crevice, finding a fault line. And as you know, if any wall, if it has faults, then sooner or later that those faults are going to be wider. So those 20% of country, such as Croatia, this Czech Republic, Greece, Hungary, Poland, Slovenia, they are moving towards autocracies. And since 2018, Hungary is no longer a democracy. After first winning power in 2010, Viktor Orban he established an increasing authoritarian-leaning regime through exacerbating bias in already disproportionate electoral system, gerrymandering, frequent constitutional changes, and benefiting the incumbent election giveaways. The meaning of all these technical jargons is that uh, Viktor Orban, which is presently the incumbent in Hungary, he has moved his country from democracy to autocracy, and he is employing all the tools available so that he remains in the power no matter what happens elsewhere. Then political leaders they are increasingly behaving openly as autocrats. and they are no longer paying lip service to democratic values, which means they have done away with paying lip service to pseudo-democratic practices, or they have thrown their pseudo-democratic mask. And in recent years, autocratization it has more often taken the form of coups, that is, rapid breakdown rather than incremental backsliding from within. So in many countries, especially in case of the 10 European Union countries, they have seen this kind of behavior, political coups, which means to take power of a country by force. So this is a rapid breakdown rather than gradual backsliding, which is another worrying instance. The drivers of democratic decline. The first driver is the rise of polarization that is hostile to democracy. Most of the autocrats, they are trying to chip away at the democratic practices established in the country. Many of those chipping away, many of those attacks on intellectual, on journalists, on free media, on liberal values. So such attack is a sign of their hostility towards anything that is democracy. Then the rise is chiefly driven by anti-pluralist parties whose hostile rhetoric and behavior against outgroups violate democratic principle. So the another factor here is anti-pluralist parties, means those parties, especially the majority party. For example, in case of US, it is white versus black, white versus mixed group, or the you can say the American versus immigrants. In case of India, it is between BJP and Muslim. So these anti-pluralist strands, they profess their loyalty to their own in groups. Then they spew their venom against such outgroups. So the Donald Trump government, he has attacked vehemently on the immigrants, on the people of mixed races. In the same way, the Indian BJP government, Indian BJP leadership, Narendra Modi and his associates, they have talked openly about such immigrants, calling them cockroaches and whatnot. So such venomous rhetoric, this is leading to polarizing behavior, and such outgroups they are painted in such a grim picture. And this reminds us of the time of during the reign of Nazi Party, when the same rhetoric, same venomous polarization, some venomous painting they have been pictured against the then living Jews. So this characterization, this caricature, it is reminiscent of those fascist tendencies. Then the citizen in highly polarized contexts such as United States, they are willing to trade off their support for democracy for potentially conflict considerations such as partisanship. In the meaning of this paragraph is, why are people towing the lines of such a rhetoric? Why are people towing the lines of such polarized rhetorics? Reason for which is that even if they believe in democracy, they are trading it off, which means they are prioritizing something else in place of and leaving democracy to fend for itself. So this trade-off, they are prioritizing their own immediate consideration. So this partisanship, especially against immigration, that immigrants they are doing this immigrants they are engaging in job losses. In immigrants they are uh, uh, they're increasing inflation. They are eating away the jobs that are available to locals. They are encroaching in their own spaces. So this partisanship, it makes them the people look for the immediate reward, the immediate uh, issue rather than the overall democratic practices. So this trade-off is also happening in case of India, in which people who believe that Hindu should be given all the rights, and all minorities, including um, the scheduled caste, the tribal people, and all the different shades of outgroups, they should not be given any say in, or they should not be given any uh, political consideration in that country. Then a rise in polarization it often coincides with increase in autocratization, and these two also reinforce each other. So the analysis of these statistics it has revealed one observation that if polarization increase, then this will lead to increase in autocratization, not increase in democracy. Then the second important contributor to autocratization is rise in misinformation. So it's a key challenge for democracy where large segment of public are misinformed in the same direction, systematically biasing public opinion. And this is after this long lecture, you do not need this explanation. There's misinformation against the outgroup, it is increasing. And when what people get in their phone, what people get in their feed is nothing but a rhetoric, a venomous rhetoric against the outgroups, then it will lead to political bias. Because um, if you are genuinely and knowingly, if you are given information that is biased, if you are giving only one shell of truth, and if you're feed it up with this thought, then one way or another you are going to be brainwashed with this line of thought, with this technical bias. So this becomes a systematic instance, because if your social media account, if it has all the feeds on rhetoric on such outgroups, then this will happen in the phones of in the social media accounts of all the family members that you live with, the co-workers that you work with, the people that you meet in the street, your neighbors, your relatives, all of them, they are feeded the same information, and this will create an echo chamber wherein all such biases they are fed and they are spread in the same vicious loop. So in that way, you get caught in such bias loop. You never get out of it. And when the same thoughts are echoed by the members that you trust, your family members, your neighbors, your co-workers, and when you hear them talking the same thing, you believe that this is the truth. So this is a kind of systematic brainwashing that further alienate people from truth. Then the rise of social media has also made it easier for extremists to spread misinformation at home and abroad. So these political elites, which want to control all the power for themselves, they use such misinformation to distort public opinion, like the way uh, I have explained here, in a chamber that echoes the same thing. And this subvert accountability and fuel polarization in democracy, because this is the easiest way. When you mm, when you fight one group with another, both the group will fight among themselves. Nobody will ask you to be accountable for any public sector thing. Then whoever going to ask you about your accountability, especially the news media, digital media, the journalists, the intellectuals, the liberals, you are going to imprison all of them. So such political repression, such political persecution will not be seen, and this will eliminate the second kind of threat. So both these instances to fight people among themselves, which is a polarization, and then political persecution, both of which they will ensure your own position. So this has become the easiest way to gain power. Yet government spread of misinformation both domestically and abroad on average is the highest among autocracies, especially like China and Russia. It seeks to influence other countries like Hungary, Turkey, and the Philippines, that seeks to stabilize and reinforce their new electoral authoritarianism at home. So, meaning of this passage is that many such autocracies, especially China, Russia, many communist countries, North Korea, many tech-led countries, they try to walk this line of spreading misinformation. And this misinformation is spread among people. This is purposefully, it is done in a way that the truth is buried deep in the ground, so that nobody will know what the truth actually is. Then there will be some element who will talk about truth, who will try to find the truth, who will dig the truth out. Then those journalists, those truth seekers, those social welfareists, they will be eliminated by one way or another. So in that way, all the threats are weeded out one by one, and finally what is left is a population that has been fed misinformation both domestically and in abroad, and all of such misinformation and the opposition, the emotional backlash it produces, all of them, they are likely to ensure your own continuation in power. In conclusion, what does the decline of democracy mean for future global politics? So democracies, they are better at reducing poverty, achieving economic growth, and reducing inequality than autocratic regimes. Because democracy, the principle upon which it works, such as equality, equitable distribution of resources, accountability, efficient administration, um, deliberation, participative democracy, all of them, they have a keen element that all sections of people, they needed to be given equal attention, which is in simple terms means welfare. So these welfare on social indicators such as poverty, economic growth, education, health, they are really taken into account, and they are really worked in an efficient manner. But autocratic regimes, they do not care about such social medias or social indicators. All they care about is how they can remain in power, for which they are ready to employ any mean possible, whether fair or foul. So democracy have also higher education enrollment, spend more on education, and have better school attendance. Further, democracies, they do not fight with one another and less likely to engage in another forms of conflict. Then democracy, they also have greater female political participation and representation, and this improves civil liberties and gender equality for women. Then they provide more public goods, invest in climate change mitigation, and have reduced CO2 emission than autocratic regimes. So this is the clear distinction, and important trade-off can be seen here. If you uh, if you opt for autocracy, then the spending on, or the distribution of resources on all indicators will be reduced. What you will be feed nothing but misinformation. But if you trade off your country, your regime with the democratic, then you will see a higher spending on all social indicators, along with uh, provision of the multiple interpretations of truth. So this is it. Thank you very much.